Well, good morning, Vintage Church. Thanks for joining us here for Church at Home. We're going to worship like normal. We're going to sing songs that hopefully are familiar to you, so I encourage you not just to listen, but to sing wherever you're at. Let's give him praise today. Just one word, you calm the storm that surrounds me. In just one word, the darkness has to retreat. In just one touch, I feel the presence of heaven. In just one touch, my eyes were open to see, my heart can't help but believe. There's nothing that our God can't do. There's not a mountain that He can't move. Oh, praise the name that makes a way. There's nothing that our God can't do. Just one word, you heal what's broken inside me. In just one word, and you revive every dream. Oh, just one touch, I feel the power of heaven. In just one touch, my eyes were open to see, my heart can't help but believe. There's nothing that our God can't do. There's not a mountain that He can't move. Oh, praise the name that makes a way. There's nothing that our God can't do. There's nothing that our God can't do. There's not a prison wall He can't break through. Oh, praise the name that makes a way. There's nothing that our God can't do. Well, sing this in faith this morning. I will believe for greater things. There's no power like the power of Jesus. Let faith arise, let all agree. There's no power like the power of Jesus. I will believe for greater things. There's no power like the power of Jesus. Let faith arise, let all agree. There's no power like the power of Jesus. I will believe for greater things. There's no power like the power of Jesus. Let faith arise, let all agree. There's no power like His power. There's nothing that our God can't do. It's not a mountain that He can't move. Oh, praise the name that makes a way. There's nothing that our God can't do. Oh, there's nothing that our God can't do. There's not a prison wall He can't break through. Oh, praise the name that makes a way. There's nothing that our God can't do.
We were waiting without hope and without light, till from heaven you came running. There was mercy in your eyes. the law and prophets, to a virgin came the word. From a throne of endless glory to a cradle in the dirt. Praise the Father, praise the Son, praise the Spirit, three in one. God of glory, majesty, praise forever to the King of Kings. To reveal the kingdom coming and to reconcile the lost, to redeem the whole creation. You did not despise the cross, for even in your suffering you saw to the other side. Knowing this was our salvation, Jesus, for our sake you died. Praise the Father, praise the Son, praise the Spirit, three in one. God of glory, majesty, praise forever to the King of Kings. In the morning that you rose, all of heaven held its breath, till that stone was moved for good, for the Lamb had conquered death. And the dead rose from their tombs, and the angels stood in awe, for the souls of all who'd come to the Father are restored. And the church of Christ was born, then the Spirit lit the flame. Now this gospel truth of old shall not kneel, shall not fade. By his blood and in his name, in his freedom I am free. For the love of Jesus Christ, who has resurrected me. Praise the Father, praise the Son, praise the Spirit, three in one. God of glory, majesty, praise forever to the King of Kings. Praise forever to the King of Kings.
Well, good morning, Vintage Church family, and any guests who may be watching this as well. This is definitely not our norm. One of the unique things about meeting in a school is sometimes we can't gather there. And so luckily for us, we have technology, which is going to allow us to still gather in some form today, doing our very first ever church at home. And hopefully you were with some friends, with some family members, eating pancakes, drinking some coffee in the comfort of your own house. I know maybe we have some community groups meeting. And so I'm glad that technology allows us to still be together in some ways today. This definitely gives me some throwback vibes to 2020. So thank God this is not our regular meeting strategy. One of the things I wanted to do today is, one, remind you, we will be meeting in person next week for Mother's Day. Our team has been working hard to make sure it's a really special day for all you moms, for us to be able to celebrate and gather together. We'll also be kicking off a new series looking at what it means to be a disciple. So definitely come next week for Mother's Day. We'll be back in person. Last Sunday, we finished our origin story series. We were walking through the first 12 chapters of the book of Genesis. And what I figured we could do is, because chapter 12 is still very early on in the book, but it kind of finishes out the first section. So I figured, why not finish the rest of the book of Genesis? Genesis is only 50 chapters, so that leaves us 38 chapters that we can go over today. And so hopefully you're comfortable. We'll probably go about 2 hours, and we're going to just cover the next 38 chapters of the book of Genesis this morning for Church at Home. I hope you're excited. I'm excited. And I'm also obviously joking. But we are going to jump all the way to chapter 50, because I think what we see in chapter 50 is actually a really great portrait of really what the entire book is about. And the big idea we're going to have for this morning is actually drawn from one of the verses in chapter 50, and I think you're going to be encouraged by it. This won't be a typical sermon. I'm going to stop along the way to ask some reflective questions, some application questions. You can write those down and take those for yourself, or maybe talk about them with somebody you're watching service with today as well. So I hope this will be impactful for all of us. I want to start, though, with my favorite comedian, recently at least, a guy named Nate Bargatze. And he has this awesome bit that he does talking about the differences of being in your 20s, 30s, and 40s. And he talks about in your 20s, somebody calls you and like, hey, you want to go? And you're like, yes, I want to go. I'm down. You don't even know where you're going. You don't know any of the details, but you're just down for a good time. And so you just pack up and you head out the door and you are off to go do whatever it is you're doing. Well, in your 30s, things change a little bit. And if someone calls you and asks you if you want to go, you have a series of questions that you want answered. You want to know when you're going. You want to know where you're going. You want to know how long you're going to be there. You want to know what the parking situation is going to be like. You have a decent amount of questions for you to decide if you want to go. And at the end of the day, you're probably going to stay home anyways when you're in your 30s. But then in your 40s, you are offended the person even called and asked you. How dare they even think that you want to leave your house? You are staying in. And I love this bit because I actually think it reveals something about me. And I've really probably been in my 30s since I was 5 years old, because I have always been the person who has a million questions to ask and to answer before I go anywhere. So some of the questions I got to get answered if I'm going to go somewhere is, I want to know where it is we're actually going. How long are we going to be gone for? How are we going to get there? What are our plans for meals? Are we going to eat out? Are we going to go grocery shopping? If we're going grocery shopping, what are we planning for breakfast, lunch, and dinner? Are we all happy with what we're going to be eating? Is there a dress code? What am I supposed to pack? What's the parking situation going to be like? A big one for me. The reason I can never live in a big city, I want to be able to park. What's the parking situation going to be like? Equally as important, bathroom situation. What's the bathroom situation going to be like? And then, is there a backup plan? If our plan A fails, what are we going to do if that thing doesn't work out? And the reality is, most of the time, I prefer to just travel within the continental United States, because if everything ends up blowing up, I want to know that I can go rent a car and drive myself back home from anywhere it may be that we are. I want to be able to get home regardless. Now, apparently, according to some people, that makes me a really annoying person to go on trips with. Definitely feel bad for my sister-in-laws having to put up with me as we travel and go places. And the other thing apparently it makes me is a bit of a control freak. Now, I promise you, this is not just me being in my 30s. I have been this way since I was very, very young. Apparently, I kill the vibe because I want to control every single thing about a trip that we go on. Right where you're at on the couch, raise your hand if you're like me. Okay, the rest of you are psychopaths. I don't know how you just kind of go for things without a plan. But this really brings me to the way we've been framing this series, these modern fractures in these ancient truths. Because what that reveals about me, and it probably reveals it some about you too, is I want to be in control of my life. I want to be in control of every situation. If I can control a situation, I'm going to do everything in my power to try and control it. I like to think of myself as a planner, but it really is this issue I have of letting go of control. I think that's the modern fracture, the modern lie that we believe, that we can actually have autonomy over our own lives, that we are actually somehow in control of the events transpiring in our lives. And the ancient truth that we have to thank the book of Genesis for, reminding us over and over and over again, is that we actually don't have full autonomy. We actually aren't in control. But there is a God who is sovereign and is sovereign in his providential acting. There is nothing that happens outside of God's control. And so even though we are not in control, he is. And that's actually even better news for us. And so here's my big idea for us today. And we're going to be in Genesis chapter 50. If you have a Bible, You can go ahead and grab it, open it up there. We'll read from it here in a second. But here's my big idea for the entire book of Genesis, but specifically here in chapter 50, and it comes from verse 20. What the enemy meant for evil, God meant for good. What the enemy meant for evil, God meant for good. And we can trace this all the way through the book of Genesis. We start with Adam and Eve and the fall. We have this awful scene where Adam and Eve disobey God and sin enters the world, corrupting God's good creation. Yet what the enemy meant for evil, God meant for good. Cain and Abel, we have the first two brothers. This family line now has been started, and what happens? One brother rises up against the other brother and murders him in cold blood in a jealous fit of rage. We get to a guy named Lamech. This is my gangster rap guy. And what we take with Lamech is, at least Cain, he felt bad for what he did. Lamech is in the streets bragging about his wickedness and his evil. Then we get the line of Seth. So Adam and Eve, they finally have another son. His name is Seth. And during the days of Seth, people again started to actually worship God. But then again, it gets corrupted. And we see that the line of Seth that was going to be this godly line that worshiped God, they end up being corrupted because they intermarry with the line of Cain and are led away from worshiping the one true God. We then get all the way to Noah, and things have gotten so bad on earth that God's judgment, God's just judgment and wrath is going to be poured out on the earth in this epic flood that wipes out everybody but this one family. But then even after the flood, we jump right back in. Sinful mankind has been wiped out. But even with this one family, we see Noah get drunk, and in his drunkenness, his son Ham and his vile actions against his family. This all leads us to what we looked at a couple weeks ago, the tower, this Tower of Babel, which really was a monument to the foolish rebellion of mankind, that what was said about mankind is true, that every intention from birth of mankind is evil and wicked. And so we were sitting back and just saying, how on earth is God going to take what the enemy meant for evil and make it for good? And finally, we get to a guy named Abraham that we looked at last Sunday. And Abraham, not because of any of his own doing. In fact, when we think of Abraham, he is this ordinary, nomadic, moon-worshiping dude, Middle East, thousands of years ago. Yet God chooses to bless him, a seed of the woman, and through blessing Abraham, all the nations of the world will be blessed. And that really kicks off then our journey to where we are now, picking up in Genesis chapter 50. I'm sure someday we'll go back and actually work through the rest of the book of Genesis. But I think picking up right here in chapter 50 is actually going to give us a great picture into what God is doing through the Hebrew patriarchs. And so we're going to have Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and then his sons, and then really how that ties into the greater redemptive plan that God has throughout all the scriptures and in the history of the world. So without further ado, we're going to read this section here in Genesis chapter 50. We're going to start in verse 15, and we're going to read through verse 21. And then I'll go back and I'll actually explain who these characters are and how it is we got here. So in Genesis 50, starting in verse 15, it says this. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, "It may be that Joseph will hate us and pay us back for all the evil that we did to him." So they sent a message to Joseph, saying, "Your father gave this command before he died. Say to Joseph, please forgive the transgression of your brothers and their sin, because they did evil to you. And now, please forgive the transgression of the servants of the God of your father." Joseph wept when they spoke to him. His brothers also came and fell down before him and said, "Behold, we are your servants." But Joseph said to them, "Do not fear, for am I in the place of God? As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. So do not fear, I will provide for you and your little ones." Thus he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. This is the word of the Lord. If any of you stood up where you were an extra point, so congratulations for that. So for those of you maybe less familiar with the biblical story, how on earth did we end up here? Who is Joseph? Who are his brothers? Why are they worried that he might take revenge against them? So we got to go all the way back to Abraham. And so Abraham was the one who God was going to bless, and he was going to be a father of great nations. The problem was Abraham was married to Sarah, and her womb was barren. Yet God gives him a miracle child of the promise. His name is Isaac. And then Isaac, he marries a girl named Rebekah. Isaac and Rebekah have 2 sons, Jacob and Esau. Esau ends up trading his birthright to Jacob through an awful trade. And so now it's going to be through the line of Jacob that God will continue to make Abraham a great nation. And then Jacob ends up airing the very first season of Sister Wives. You don't believe me? He ends up marrying 2 sisters, Leah and Rachel. Now, the reality was Jacob, his name actually meant deceiver. And even when we look at him deceiving Esau to be able to get the birthright, well, his father-in-law ends up deceiving him and ends up giving him Leah to marry, even though Rachel was the one that he loved. You might say, well, why does he love Rachel more than Leah? And the Bible tells us that Rachel was more attractive. So there you go. Some things never change. But Rachel really was the one that Jacob loved. And Jacob, through wrestling with God, his name actually gets changed to Israel. And he is really the father of Israel. And it'll be his sons that he has actually with 4 different women. So again, sister wives, chaos. They become the 12 tribes of Israel. But along the way, what happens is Jacob, he can't have kids with Rachel. She is barren. So he ends up having kids with Leah, ends up having kids with 2 other concubines. And then finally, he ends up having a son with Rachel, the person he actually loves. Again, absolute mess, but this is real life. Genesis is a very real story. And so he ends up having a son with Rachel, the woman he actually loves. And this son is Joseph. And so Joseph is his 11th son, is his most beloved son. And all of his older sons are jealous because Joseph is clearly the favorite. And so that is kind of where we get here. And this is where we're picking up as we jump into it. And so if this sounds like an absolute mess, just to remind you, again, the Bible is a very real story. And so here, we're going to get a little more context. Well, let's jump into chapter 50. So it starts with this. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, so Jacob has now died, they said, it may be that Joseph will hate us and pay us back for all the evil that we did to him. So pause. What's all the evil they did to him? So let's jump back into the story and we'll see what exactly led to this moment. And so Joseph is born to Jacob and Rachel, like I had mentioned. He is his father's favorite. There's this story where his father makes him this robe of many colors, and all of his older brothers just can't stand Joseph. Well, Joseph, he ends up getting some dreams from God, and we're going to see that becomes a way that God works providentially later, that Joseph is given dreams and can also interpret these dreams. And so Joseph goes to his family and ends up telling them that he had these dreams where all of his older brothers and his parents are bowing down to him. Now, any older siblings in the room, the last thing you want to hear from your baby brother or sister who have probably been spoiled rotten their whole life is that you're going to bow down to them. So Joseph, maybe not the most emotionally intelligent here, but he tells this to his brothers, so they cannot stand him. Well, what ends up happening is Joseph and his brothers, they are herdsmen. And so his brothers are off taking care of their herd in kind of a far off place. His dad sends Joseph to his brothers to go check on them. Well, his brothers see him coming from a long way away, and they're starting to plot, let's just off this dude. Like, let's kill Joseph. We can't stand him. We're out in the middle of nowhere. We can make it look like an animal killed him, and we can kind of cover up the whole thing. We can get rid of Joseph. And so they end up not killing him, but they throw him into a pit, and some Ishmaelite traders end up coming through, and they end up trading him to these tradesmen that are headed to Egypt for 20 pieces of silver. And then they take his coat, they rip it up, they put animal blood on it, and they frame his death. So his brothers sell him into slavery. Well, Joseph is then taken into Egypt, and he's sold to Potiphar, who is an officer of Pharaoh. And he actually works his way up to be a very well-known and well-respected person working for this political ruler inside of Egypt. But what we have to notice here is Joseph is a young Hebrew boy who kind of knew rural living. And now he's brought into the big city and he is just surrounded by all types of crazy things. Yet the remarkable thing about Joseph is Joseph remains a faithful man to God the whole way through. And God ends up blessing him because of it. So this is what his brothers are afraid of. His brothers realize we have been awful to Joseph. Our father has now died and we're worried he's going to take revenge on us. We're going to keep reading here for a moment. So back in Genesis 50 verses 16 through 17, it says this, so they sent a message to Joseph saying, your father gave this command before he died. Say to Joseph, please forgive the transgression of your brothers and their sin. because they did evil to you. And now please forgive the transgression of the servants of the God of your father. So this is so funny because his brothers, they got in this situation because they lied and deceived and did sinful things, selling their brother into slavery, then lying to their dad that he had died. They got themselves in this mess. Yet once again, they are plotting, they are lying, they are deceiving, and they are sinning because their father never said this. They're telling Joseph, hey, before your dad, Jacob, died, he told you, make sure you forgive us for the things that we did. So there's no indication that Jacob ever said these things. There's rather more indication that they're once again lying. And I think this just shows the power that guilt has over us. See, the reality is, even though Joseph has already forgiven his brothers, they have not yet forgiven themselves. And even more so, they realize there's no reason Joseph should be forgiving them. They sinned against Joseph. Joseph did nothing wrong. Joseph was an annoying younger brother who was rather arrogant and kind of maybe full of himself, really didn't have some social skills. But besides that, he did nothing wrong. And his brothers did all these bad things to him. And now they've been forgiven. Now they're actually kind of being rewarded. They can't stomach it. See, they still feel like they need to atone for their own sins. They don't feel like they deserve the grace that their brother is showing them. So my application question for you here, as we kind of pause in the middle of this, is there an area of your life where you're struggling to actually receive God's forgiveness, even though grace has already been extended to you? Is there some sin in your life that you've already confessed, you've already given up to God, yet you still feel guilty, like you somehow need to make up for it yourself, and it's keeping you from receiving the free gift of God's grace? Or maybe you're living as someone who, maybe you're not living as someone who's been forgiven. Maybe you're still cowering and maybe waiting to be punished for that thing. And I would just say, receive God's grace today. The reality is you don't deserve it. Mercy is the reality that you're not getting something that you deserve. And then grace is actually the fact that you're receiving something you didn't earn. And so accept God's free gift of forgiveness today. We keep reading in Genesis chapter 50. At the end of verse 17, it says this: Joseph wept as they spoke to him. So they came to him and said, hey, before Jacob died, our father, he wanted you to forgive us. And Jacob begins to weep, and he says to his brothers, it says his brothers also came and fell down before him and said, behold, we are your servants. But Joseph said to them, do not fear, for am I in the place of God? So they come to their brother Joseph, and they said, hey, we need you to forgive us. We're your servants. Once again, trying to maybe even atone for their own wrongdoings. And Joseph looks at him, he says, guys, don't fear. Am I in the place of God? I love this. There's few guys in the Bible that really kind of just take dubs the whole way. And that is Joseph. Joseph continues to just be an upright dude. Most of the guys in the Bible, they have some awesome moments and also some really awful moments. Man, Joseph just kind of crushes it the whole time. So Joseph basically responds in the exact opposite way that his brothers respond. He says, am I in the place of God? Joseph here is really showing great humility and great restraint, because in many ways, Joseph actually is in a place of God over their lives. So at this point in time, Joseph is number 2 in all of Egypt. He has risen the ranks and he is right next to Pharaoh, Pharaoh's trusted right-hand man. His brothers here, they have nothing over Joseph. Joseph has everything over them. They are completely indebted to him if he were to try to apply any type of pressure on them. If he were to make use of that, he could make them his slaves, and he would be probably even right in doing so. But I love it because Joseph has no intention of playing God. He has no intention of lying. He has no intention of manipulating the situation to try to gain something for himself. The brothers and their families are at the sheer mercy of Joseph, yet Joseph acknowledges who the one true God actually is and who he is in relation to him. Another application question for us here is, how often do you and I end up in worse situations because we try to play God? Maybe it's in a situation where you are trying to lie, and maybe you wouldn't call it lying, but you're trying to manipulate a situation. You're trying to manipulate relationships. You're trying to manipulate people, or maybe manipulate a perception in order to actually get something that you don't deserve. You're trying to play God in doing that. Maybe you're similar to me where you try to control all the situations of your life and you actually think if you just had enough time to sit and think through any given situation, you could figure it out. You're relying on your own ability to plot, your own ability to rationalize things, and your own ability to solve problems. And so you're actually becoming your own God. What's a situation right now that maybe you are trying to control or manipulate instead of trusting that God providentially is actually working all things for your good and for his glory? We're going to keep reading now in chapter 50, going to verse 20. And this is where we get this big idea from. So Joseph now responding to his brothers, hey guys, look, I have no intention of trying to play God. I have forgiven you already. And he says this is why Joseph has forgiven them and why they've been able to be reconciled. Joseph says this, as for you, you meant evil against me. This throwing him into the pit, this selling him into slavery, the lying to their dad that he had been eaten by an animal. But God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. He says this earlier in chapter 45, verse 8. He says, so it was not you that sent me here, talking about Egypt. It was not you that sent me here selling me into slavery, but it was God. He has made me a father to Pharaoh and Lord of all his house and ruler over all the land of Egypt. I love this perspective that Joseph has here. He's saying, you guys can't even take credit for your own wickedness because God was using it the entire time. God was working and orchestrating all things the whole time to actually preserve my life, get me to Egypt so many lives would be saved. Joseph has an incredible sense of the providential nature of God working all things out, nothing happening outside of the scope and purview of God. And I want to just for a moment consider all the things that happened to Joseph since getting to Egypt. So we kind of left off the context with his brothers selling him into slavery, him ending up in Potiphar's house. Here's how things go for Joseph in Egypt. For Joseph to be able to say, hey, this was God the entire time. So God ends up blessing Joseph when he gets to Potiphar's house, and he ends up rising up the ranks in Potiphar's house from being a servant and a slave to being his right-hand man and overseeing everything that Potiphar oversaw. And again, Potiphar would have been a pretty high up political leader in Egypt. Along the way, Potiphar's wife actually tries to seduce Joseph. Joseph is having none of it. Joseph flees, being a man of integrity, and Potiphar's wife goes and lies to Potiphar. And so Joseph is falsely accused, falsely tried, and thrown into prison even though he's innocent. Man, maybe some parallels to a forthcoming seed of Abraham that would come later, a guy named Jesus. But Joseph is thrown into prison. He doesn't know, well, he knows why, but it was all a lie. It was something he didn't actually do. Yet once again, Joseph, he begins having these dreams. Because even in prison, the blessing of God is still on him. And while he's in the jail, he correctly interprets the dreams of Pharaoh's cupbearer and baker. So both these guys were in jail with him. They have dreams. He interprets the dreams, and they actually both end up getting out. Well, Pharaoh begins to have some dreams, and he doesn't know what's going on. And the cupbearer and the baker, they remember Joseph, this guy who's in jail, getting old. And he says, hey, Pharaoh, there's actually this guy who's in jail who has the ability to interpret dreams. And that's because God's giving him that power. And so he actually is able to interpret these dreams for Pharaoh. And as he's interpreting these dreams, he tells Pharaoh, hey, we're going to have 7 years of abundance in Egypt. But then after the 7 years of abundance, we're going to have 7 years of a famine. And Pharaoh is just remarkably shocked by this, that this man named Joseph was able to interpret these dreams and what they meant. And so Pharaoh actually takes Joseph from prison and puts him up the highest ranks he could in Egypt and anoints Joseph as second in command over all of Egypt and is going to be in charge of this famine relief program that ends up going on. And this is how Joseph and his brothers are actually reunited, because the famine ends up spreading throughout all of the land. And so Joseph's brothers, who are still back in the land called Canaan, they end up having this famine. They hear that there's this relief program going on in Egypt. And so the brothers come to Joseph, who's in charge. And these brothers standing before Joseph, not recognizing him, but he recognizes his brothers. And they go through this long journey. We don't have time to kind of get into all of the relationship things that end up happening between Joseph and his brothers. But long story short, Joseph ends up revealing to his brothers, hey, It's me, your brother Joseph. I know what you guys did to me, but I want you to know that you didn't send me to Egypt. God was the one who brought me here. And because God brought me here, I'm now able to help this entire land. How many more people would have died due to this famine if God hadn't sent me to Egypt, allowed me to go through all the things, end up in jail, end up out of jail, end up interpreting this dream, end up putting together this relief program, and now here you are, my brothers, coming to me. And he ends up inviting his brothers to come and actually live in Egypt. They go back to bury their father, Jacob, and now they've come back once again to settle in the land of Egypt. This remarkable story that traces the redemptive plan of God through Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Jacob's younger son, Joseph. There's one more son, younger, Benjamin. These become the 12 tribes of Israel. And it's also the way that God gets his people into Egypt, which is going to be a really big part of the narrative as we jump into the book of Exodus, if we were to keep reading. So it's this remarkable situation where Joseph, realizing that all the suffering, all the stuff that he went through was God providentially acting to actually save the lives of many, including Joseph's own family. Joseph, he endured years and many different situations of suffering. And you can just imagine that he just had no idea what God was up to. God, why would you bless me and let me rise up all these ranks in Potiphar's house just to be thrown in prison because someone lies about me? Just to spend years in prison to eventually get out and have this dream brought before me. You imagine there were years of him questioning God, what are you up to? Yet he remained steadfast in his faith that God was up to something bigger than what he could see himself. So here's my application question for you guys. And I know all of us are in different places, even as I'm bringing this message to you this morning. But so here's my question. How does the sovereign and providential character of God give you comfort currently in your own season of waiting, suffering, and confusion? Some of you can relate to where Joseph was at. You feel like you're in your own pit. You feel like you're in your own prison. And you're just saying, God, where are you at right now? What are you doing? How could I possibly respond the way that Joseph responds? That you're actually the one bringing me through all these things ultimately for some type of good. So no matter the season of waiting, the season of suffering, the season of confusion that you were in, how does the character of God, that he is sovereign and that he's working providentially for his glory and for his good, and that he loves you, how does that actually affect your life today and your perspective on what you're going through? We get to verse 21 and Joseph continues. He says, so do not fear. I will provide for you and for your little ones. Talking to his brothers and now their families. Thus he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. This is what was going to ultimately get the descendants of Jacob, otherwise known as Israel, to Egypt. The story is going to continue, and the Israelite people, the Hebrew people, the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, they're going to spend 400 years in Egypt. And unfortunately, things aren't going to go well for them. They're going to end up in their own season of suffering, their own season of slavery, where they're going to be crying out to the God of their forefathers to remember the promise that he made all the way back to that guy named Abraham that we've talked about. And they're going to get to this moment where God is going to bring them out of the land of Egypt. And this story called the Exodus is going to happen. And within the Exodus, they remember it with this moment in this meal called the Passover. See, God's going to send these plagues to show Pharaoh, this is a different Pharaoh now, who the boss is, who the real God is. And he's going to bring his people out of Egypt. But in doing so, the very last plague that he's going to send is the angel of death. And the angel of death is going to kill the firstborn child of any family who doesn't follow these instructions. That they were to take a perfect, spotless lamb without blemish and kill the lamb prepared a certain way, but then take the lamb with a hyssop branch, the blood of the lamb, and put it over their doorposts. I heard a pastor recently say that the way they gave the instructions, it actually would have formed something like a cross over their doorpost. And as the angel of death came, it would pass over their house because of the blood of the perfect and spotless lamb, which jumps all the way ahead to the future descendant of Abraham, Jesus, as he's sitting there having his Last Supper meal with his disciples, the Passover meal, where they would have been remembering this exodus out of the slavery of Egypt. Yet Jesus did something different with it. And he said, this bread is going to represent my body broken for you. And this wine is actually going to represent my blood of a new covenant, because I am the better, perfect, and spotless lamb. You've had to make sacrifices over and over again for your sin. Well, I am the perfect and fully effective sacrifice that will be sacrificed once for the sins of all the world. What happened with Joseph and his brothers, where his brothers really tried to mess things up. What happened in the entire book of Genesis, where time and time again, mankind fails and mankind is evil and mankind turns their back on God. God is working all of those things out, and his promises are true, and his promises lead all the way to Jesus, to his cross. And the great news about the story, the redemptive plan we have in Jesus, was the cross was not the final story, but rather it was his resurrection. In his resurrection, we don't just have freedom from slavery of sin, but we actually have victory over it, because Jesus conquered sin, death, and the grave, and none of those things have any power over us anymore as Christians. And that is the story that Genesis is setting up for us, that what the enemy meant for evil, God always, from day one, you could say before the foundations of the world even, meant it for good. God always comes through on his promises. And that's really what Genesis is reminding us of, that you and I, we are not in control. The modern lie that we can control our situations and we can have full autonomy, it's just not true. But the actual truth is far better, that God has sovereignly orchestrated every step of our world for his redemptive plan to go back and make good on his promise of Genesis 3:15, that the serpent will strike the heel of the woman's seed, but he, Jesus, is going to crush the head of the serpent. I want to give you guys an opportunity now to kind of walk through all of that. I hope you've had some time to wrestle through some of those application questions. But I'll actually give you a moment to be able to take communion where you're at. Communion is a communal thing that we do as a church body. And so it's something we do every single Sunday to remember what Jesus has done, remember how he is the better Passover lamb. And so I hope now as you're gathered with some people together that you could actually do that with one another and remember that meal. Something I would encourage you to do before you take it, read 1 Corinthians 11, 23 through 26. That's 1 Corinthians 11, 23 through 26. Go ahead and read that as you take communion together. It will probably sound familiar. And I just remind you, communion is for believers, for those who have placed their faith in the finished work of Jesus Christ, who call him their personal Lord and Savior. Communion is something we do in remembrance of what Jesus has done, but the communion is not the substance. Jesus is the substance. And so if you're not a Christian, if this is maybe striking you as new, maybe you've never heard this redemptive plan of God, I'd ask that you don't take communion, but rather you take Christ instead. And I hope there's somebody there with you today who could talk to you more about that. If not, reach out to us. Our email addresses, our social media, whatever. We'd love to talk to you more about it. Let me go ahead and pray for us now as we end this church at home time together. I hope you can take communion where you're at with some people, and then we'll see you back here next week for Mother's Day. Let me pray for us. Jesus, so thank you so much for the book of Genesis, the origin story of the entire world, starting with creation, walking through the sin of mankind, working through how things got worse and worse and worse, yet your plan remained the same, getting us all the way to Genesis chapter 50 in the story of Joseph, where Joseph could confidently say, after a really hard life of pain and suffering and betrayal, that he could say, what the enemy meant for evil, you meant for good. So God, I pray for my brothers and sisters, our Vintage Church family, guests who may be tuning in today, Lord, that whatever season they're walking through of pain, of suffering, of doubts, of questioning where on earth you are, I pray that they would have peace, that they would have understanding in your providential and sovereign character, that no matter where they're at in the journey, someday they will be able to look back and say what the enemy meant for evil, God meant for good. And I see how God the entire time was holding my hand through it all. I do pray, Lord, for those really going through some hard times today, that you would comfort them in your spirit. What a gift that we have your spirit dwelling within us for those of us that are believers. You would comfort them and remind them that you see them, that you are with them. Jesus, we pray this all in your name. Amen. Hey guys, it was great to do church at home with you all today. I hope you all have a great rest of your Sunday. We'll see you back Sandra Day O'Connor, 10 a.m. for Mother's Day next Sunday.